Midnight in Terre Haute, Indiana. The atmosphere froze in the corridor of the federal prison where the execution chamber lay waiting, just steps from where Lisa Montgomery had just arrived. She was escorted here under heavy guard, transferred from FMC Carswell Women's Prison in Texas after a long and tense journey. Anyone would assume that after such an exhausting trip, Lisa would be drained, would sleep through the few final hours of her life. But no. Lisa entered the cell with wide eyes, unusually alert. She began the final 24 hours of her life not in peace, not in control, but in a legal storm swirling around her fate. It was January 12th, 2021. Lisa should have been dead long ago. The original execution date was set a month earlier, but the COVID-19 pandemic struck her defense team like an unexpected blow. Positive tests prevented them from fully defending their client. The court agreed to a temporary stay, but even that stay didn't follow proper procedure. The Federal Death Penalty Act requires 90 days notice, but Lisa received only 35 days. Her lawyers cried this was a blatant violation. And now, just hours before the final curtain fell, the Court of Appeals agreed, issuing a temporary stay. A fragile legal victory. A glimmer of hope as thin as thread. But Lisa Montgomery sat there, untouched by any of it. Lawyers later described her that night as extremely fragile, disconnected from reality, showing flashes of psychosis. Psychological experts gave diagnoses: severe depression, PTSD, borderline personality disorder. They asserted her mind had deteriorated to the point where she no longer understood what was happening. This was a massive legal issue. A Supreme Court ruling decades earlier made clear it's unconstitutional to execute a prisoner who lacks the capacity to understand the punishment or why they're being punished. Lead attorney Kelly Henry sees this opening. Ms. Montgomery is mentally deteriorating, and we are seeking to prove her incompetence. That night, District Judge James Patrick Hanlon intervened, issuing a temporary stay on grounds of mental competency, ruling Montgomery could not be executed without a proper hearing. Another fragile lifeline, and only hours remained. Lisa Montgomery stayed awake all night. She refused sedatives, quietly scribbling hurried notes to her lawyers and family. The defense team maintained contact throughout the night, providing updates and comfort, aware she was drifting further away with each hour. Prison staff described her as silent, barely speaking, just staring at the wall. The quietest, most withdrawn inmate under death watch they'd seen in years. No resistance, no requests, no outbursts, just frozen silence, eerily strange. And perhaps it wasn't just mental state or pending stays keeping her awake. Lisa was under 24/7 death watch. The lights in her cell blazed continuously without rest. 3 guards rotated shifts outside, recording every movement, checking her responsiveness while cameras rolled constantly. Breakfast came and went, untouched. It was said Montgomery had stopped eating completely as she withdrew deeper into herself, silent, distant, like a ghost. Severed from the legal storm outside. While lawyers raced through legal filings, no one could forget why Lisa Montgomery lay there. No context, no diagnosis, no trauma could erase the horrifying brutality of what she had done. We must go back to 2004, to a small house in Skidmore, Missouri, where a heinous crime was about to unfold in a way that even seasoned investigators couldn't anticipate. In December of that year, Lisa Montgomery drove from Kansas to Missouri with a plan she'd harbored for weeks. She didn't arrive as a dangerous stranger. She came wearing the perfect mask of a dog buyer. Her target was Bobbie Jo Stinnett, a young 23-year-old woman who bred rat terrier dogs and sold them online. Bobbie was 8 months pregnant, eagerly awaiting her first child. On December 16th, Lisa called asking about a dog. Bobbie, with the kindness of a small seller, invited her to the house to look. That was her final mistake. What happened in that house made all of America shudder. Lisa didn't leave with a dog. She left carrying Bobbie's unborn baby. Bobbie Jo Stinnett was found dead in a pool of blood, while her baby girl was taken in an act so savage it was almost unbelievable. But by a medical miracle, the baby survived. The next day, she was reunited with her family, while Lisa was quickly arrested. Police traced phone calls and online messages, discovering the woman calling herself Darlene Fisher, was Lisa Montgomery. When the FBI raided her Kansas home, they found the baby. Lisa tried to claim she had just given birth, but forensic evidence said otherwise. DNA doesn't lie. The umbilical cord doesn't lie. Computer search history doesn't lie. Lisa's motive made criminal psychologists dig deep. She had faked pregnancy with her husband for months, even preparing a nursery, announcing the coming child to everyone. As time passed and her belly didn't grow, desperation struck. She needed a baby, not to nurture or love in a normal way, but to cover a lie that had spiraled out of control. That's the kind of desperation that can turn a human into a monster. Lisa was charged, tried, and ultimately sentenced to death. Bobbie Jo's loved ones carried this loss ever since. Nothing could return her to them. But the defense team didn't give up. They dug into Lisa Montgomery's past and discovered another story, a story of victim before she became killer. Lisa's childhood was a chain of brutal trauma, cruelly abused by her stepfather, continuously subjected to physical and mental violence, raped multiple times since adolescence. Mental health experts testified she suffered severe PTSD, chronic depression, borderline personality disorder. Her brain, they argued, had been reshaped by trauma to the point she couldn't make rational decisions. Lead attorney Kelly Henry emphasized Lisa was destroyed by years of abuse and should never have been placed on death row. They relied on the 1986 Ford v. Wainwright precedent, the historic Supreme Court ruling affirming that executing someone without mental capacity is unconstitutional. If a prisoner doesn't understand the punishment or why they're being punished, executing them is no longer justice but cruel and unusual punishment. But the Justice Department disagreed. They called this a brazen ploy to evade a lawful sentence, accusing Montgomery's team of overwhelming the government and courts with last-minute tactics. "This isn't last-minute theater," Kelly Henry shot back. "Lisa is broken, and this breaking didn't happen naturally. It's the consequence of a life crushed from childhood." As Lisa Montgomery sat in silence in her cell, outside, a legal battle was erupting with rare intensity. From afternoon into the night of January 12th, courts across the country continuously issued contradicting rulings, creating a chaotic spiral that even legal experts found dizzying. The Court of Appeals issued a stay. The Supreme Court reversed it. District Judge James Patrick Hanlon stopped execution on grounds of mental competency. The Justice Department appealed immediately. Each ruling pulled Lisa Montgomery closer to or further from death, like a cruel game of legal fate. At 4 p.m., just 1 hour before the scheduled execution time, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals suddenly intervened. Their reasoning: Lisa's legal team might be right. The government had violated the original sentencing order by skipping critical procedural steps. A barrier once crossed suddenly reappeared. The official hour arrived. At exactly 5 p.m. on January 12, 2021, Lisa Montgomery was scheduled to die. But there was no movement, no guards, no final walk. Each passing minute pulled Lisa closer to the midnight boundary, the moment when President Donald Trump's time window would slam shut, passing the matter to incoming President Joe Biden's administration, who had pledged to halt federal executions. This was critical political context. If Lisa survived tonight, she might survive forever. Outside the prison, tension hung thick in the frigid air. Reporters gathered, constantly refreshing news pages, waiting for any sign of a Supreme Court decision. Protesters assembled in candlelit prayer vigils, holding signs reading "Lisa's life matters" and "Stop the execution." Around the world, human rights organizations spoke out, calling for mercy. Civil rights activists called the situation a constitutional catastrophe waiting to happen. They warned that executing Lisa Montgomery without holding a competency hearing would cross far beyond the boundaries of lawful punishment, turning justice into vengeance. At the Supreme Court, the final legal battle reached its climax. The Justice Department pushed to clear the way, while Montgomery's lawyers fired off a final round of desperate filings. While the outside world churned in chaos, inside the cell was eerie silence. Lisa was no longer alone. Two people who had never abandoned her had arrived. attorney Amy Harwell, and spiritual advisor John Francisco. They sat together for hours, talking, praying, sharing quiet moments. John wasn't just a pastor, he was part of her past, the bus driver who once picked her up for Sunday school every week. His mother had been her teacher. At some point, John took out a small, faded photograph from his wallet. The back had writing, "Lisa, 7 years old, 2nd grade." It was a photo she had given him when she was a little girl. He had kept it all these years. He promised her that no matter what happened tonight, he would be there, standing beside her. And when the moment came, he would sing the familiar songs from childhood. Jesus Loves Me, Amazing Grace, A Small Light in the Darkest Hour. The night continued. The world still waited. 11:30 p.m. The United States Supreme Court issued its final ruling. They denied all of Lisa Montgomery's remaining appeals. The final door slammed shut. Coordinator T.J. Watson received orders from Washington. Proceed. Despite passing midnight, the execution would still count as January 12th under the death warrant. Co-counsel Sandra Babcock later called this legal battle unprecedented. Nearly a dozen judges appointed by both Democrats and Republicans from 4 different courts had issued stays of execution for Lisa Montgomery. But the government continued forward relentlessly, like a machine that couldn't be stopped. Outside, white vans left the media center, transporting official witnesses to the execution chamber. Among them were reporters, government officials, legal observers, and Bobbie Jo's family, those seeking what they saw as closure long overdue. Elsewhere in the building, Lisa was being prepared. Medical staff checked blood pressure, ensured IV lines were ready. No one spoke much. Protocols were executed in cold, professional silence. At exactly midnight, crossing into the new day, precisely 24 hours after this final countdown began, Lisa Montgomery entered the brightly lit, cold execution chamber. The small room with white brick walls, fluorescent lights illuminating every corner, nowhere for shadows to hide. She was led to the metal gurney with thin padding in the center of the room. 7 restraints were fastened tight, 2 at the wrists, 2 at the upper arms, 1 across the chest, 2 at the ankles. Heart monitors were attached. Her glasses remained on, a small gesture of humanity amid brutal protocol. The mask, a silent mark of the COVID era, was gently removed. Spiritual advisor John Francisco arrived as promised, prepared to stand beside her and sing words of comfort. But at the last minute, prison officials turned their backs on him. "Too late," a staff member said. Lisa was already strapped down. No changes allowed. He was forced to leave. Her lawyers later called it an unnecessary insult. The government stopped at nothing in its zeal to end this damaged and delusional woman. It was a gratuitously cruel, lawless, and unnecessary act of power. Past midnight, the curtain slid open, revealing Lisa Montgomery to the witnesses waiting behind the glass. She turned her head slightly, eyes drifting toward the small crowd. An Associated Press reporter later described her as looking confused for a moment, as if not fully comprehending where she was. The warden stepped forward, asking if she had any final words. In a small, muddled voice, she replied, "No," then closed her eyes tight. No statement, no resistance. The only sign of tension witnesses noticed was her fingers tapping lightly, rhythmically on the gurney strap. A small heart tattoo near her thumb moved with each tap, an unconscious movement of a body counting its final seconds. The chemicals began flowing through the IV, pentobarbital, a high-dose anesthetic. Lisa licked her lips, gasped once briefly, then went still. An observing reporter described, her midsection rose slightly, then quickly stopped. No drama, no obvious pain, just an abrupt cessation of life. At exactly 1:31 a.m. Eastern Time, the Bureau of Prisons pronounced Lisa Montgomery dead. She became the first woman executed by the U.S. federal government in nearly 70 years. The 11th execution carried out under the Trump administration in just 6 months. The curtain slowly closed. The room sank into silence. Witnesses departed, some quietly, some crying. Outside, protesters still stood in the cold night, candles still burning. No one won this night, only death, justice, or revenge, depending on who you asked.